Well, welcome. We're really honored to have you all here tonight. This is an exciting program. This is the second time we've ever done a program in restorative justice. Last year was about the same time last year that we did this program, and it's a really fascinating one. So we're gonna the panel's gonna speak for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to do a lot of questions. So get your questions ready as we go along. The team will be walking around and help you with that. And there's also a few hundred, I'm not sure, it could be anywhere from 200 to 600 people online. So we'll be taking questions from online as well. But you are being recorded, so that's a really good thing to always be aware of. But welcome. This topic tonight on restorative justice is a part of our Justice 101 series, and we're going to focus on restorative justice and take a closer look. What does it mean? How does it work? Where are we seeing it? What's the historical significance of it? And how does it impact sites like this? So welcome to Eastern State. At Eastern State, today, what we do is preserve America's first penitentiary. This was the site of criminal justice reform. This is where criminal justice reform was born in America. And it had that same idea. Let's take a closer look at people. Let's take a closer look at the justice system and see if we can do good. Our work today is really about advancing the understanding of the criminal justice system to ensure that those who are most impacted by it all of us have a deeper understanding of how it impacts communities, how it impacts our neighbor, how it impacts each other. All of that matters. But to what end? To what end is a more just society? Don't worry about the door, it is a little glitchy, so you're totally fine. Just wanted to give you that acknowledgement. You are in a really fascinating historic site, and it makes the doors hard to close, and that is okay. We take it for what it is because it's powerful and it's wonderful. Justice 101 is a series that allows us to look at these programs in this site and online and around the country to really question about what can we learn from our past? How can we understand the history of the justice system as a whole? And then how does it affect our choices we make today, from policy to practice to how we treat our neighbor to how we ensure our government is funding or not funding programs? And all of that is in our purview to care about and to make change on. And that is a part of the program as well. So we'll be asking lots of questions about what can we do tomorrow, 3 months from now, 10 months from now, about this to keep it top of mind, but to make change as well. So tonight, as we look at this transformative process of restorative justice, I am honored to have these two amazing panelists with me tonight. And they're really experts in this area, and I am really excited to learn from them. But I do promise at the end, I promise to make sure that all of you get questions and I just don't hog the mic the entire time. So let me begin by introducing you to Suzanne Estrella, the Commonwealth Victim Advocate. She is an amazing human being that brings more than 30 years of legal experience to the table, including 15 years working directly with survivors of crime in Pennsylvania. During her time as the legal director at the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, she gained deep insight into the trauma victims experience and endure through the pain that is caused to them, but also through the system that is meant to support them. And how does this system re-traumatize people? Her leadership has been game-changing in Pennsylvania and has helped expand victim services across the state, including bringing on full-time social workers to run support groups and creative programs that build hope and resilience. Again, Eastern State began with this belief that human beings should all treat each other with human dignity and center the light in every single person. And that's the work that you do every day. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for being here. Can we give her a big round of applause? Now, our next introduction is Keith Hickman. Now, Keith, I'm so excited is here, also because this is his first time here, right? First time here. And this man is brilliant. We've known each other for like 3 or 4 years. At least we are in a group, the Civic Collaboratory, where a bunch of civic nerds around the country gather and talk and bring things together to make change. And I was so lucky to get to meet Keith. He is the Vice President for Partnerships at the International Institute for Restorative Practices. Keith has spent more than 30 years advancing community health, civic leadership, and education through restorative practices. His work spans cities across the United States, including New York, Chicago, LA, all across Pennsylvania, Louisville, and you were just in Chattanooga? Doing a lot of good work in this area. And really the work he's leading is multi-sector, and that's important. It is not just the work in classrooms or incarceration settings or in the justice system, it is across all platforms. We really need to engage in this work in every community we engage in, and with Thanksgiving coming up, it's really important to think of these strategies when we're at the table. It can be really difficult with your own family, and so let's lean on that in every layer of our life and every layer of the work that we do. His work is really expanding into the practices that benefit children, communities, and families, and we are honored to have him join us tonight. Could everybody give Keith a big round of applause? Okay, so I have a million questions, but Keith's used to this, you're getting used to this. I really think one of the things that I hear constantly is people talking about restorative practices, restorative justice, all these pieces. But I think one of the concerns that I have is that we're not talking about the same thing when we have those conversations. So I'd really like to toss it to both of you that in your work when doing restorative justice and using restorative practices, how do you really define what that is and why it's such a powerful alternative to ending harm in our society? Either one of you can go first.
You want to start? Or you want me to go ahead and I'll build on. We'll do it together.
All right. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I would say basically in our work, restorative justice is a different way to look at justice by centering victims and survivors and providing an opportunity to address harms. So we see that played out in different ways. I don't want to jump to another question.
You can jump.
But it's about giving people the opportunity to be seen, to be heard, and to be understood. And we do that for victims, and we do those for people who have caused harm in some of our other programs. I'll let you jump in.
Good. All right. So I'm going to build on that point. I'm going to start with universally, wherever you go in the world or wherever you go across this country, when folks talk about restorative practices or restorative justice, and I'll get to that in a minute because folks are like, is it restorative justice or practice or which one is it? And we still struggle with that too in our own community as well. I want you to picture a quadrant, a square with 4 quadrants. And I want you to think about that top left quadrant as being high control, right? And I want you to think about the quadrant next to that, to the right, as being doing things with people. So it's high support. I want you to think about the bottom quadrant below that as being permissive, doing things for people. And I want you to think about that other quadrant as doing nothing at all, or just being kind of a cosmetic approach. I want to give you that visual because that's what we call in restorative practices the social discipline window. And it pretty much frames every dynamic relationship that we see when it comes to wrongful doing or harm or crime or anything. Most approaches to harm or crime is done in a very high punitive way. And we get stuck in that box, right? It's called high control. A lot of things are done just like policies are in place and they'll just take care of it. It'll take care of itself, or we'll just put a lot of money into it and that'll fix the problem. Oftentimes, we're too far on the permissive side and we don't hold people accountable. Or I would consider what we do is we take away or steal their ability to make things right. The last one is where we want to land. 99 to 100% of the time is doing things with people. So it's really about control, support, And when we have high expectations for each other and high control along with high support, we're at our best. And that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about being punitive versus being supportive. And so when we talk about restorative practices, it is a way for us to repair harm, a way for communities to repair harm. It is not a way to not hold people accountable. You hear that quite often. Does not mean that people shouldn't be responsible or that sometimes people may need to be arrested for things. Of course they do. But the question becomes is, what does that support side really, really, really look like? How do we make sure that communities feel supported, communities are heard, and building on this point of it really is a victim-centered approach where people who have been harmed have a way to feel safe and a way to repair that harm. And so I'll just start with that kind of broad stroke definition, and we can dig into that a little bit more around settings.
That, I think you both said this word that as we look through this is over and over again, it's healing. It is, and when I think about the justice system, and we have the Constitution, we the people, to establish justice. And part of that establishing justice is to keep people safe. But then the other side of that is also to heal, to correct harm, so then people stay safe as well. So those two things are connected with this idea of prevention and healing. And those two things are strongly connected in this practice. So before we kind of dive into that, to again, to what end? To establish justice. That is the end. And that means an environment and a safety where people can, have less harm and people are healed from that harm. But what does it look like when you are practicing restorative justice, when you're in the work for you, in your work? Tell me a little bit about your work, and then what does that look like for you, almost in the day-to-day? And then Keith, I'd love to see how you've seen this transcend in classrooms, in community centers, in incarcerated settings as well.
Okay, well, my office, our responsibility by statute is to elevate the voices of crime survivors to make sure that their rights are being heard and that their needs are being met. So on a daily basis, when it comes to restorative justice practices, we have some programmings. One is called the Victim Offender Dialogue Program. And that is a program where it is survivor initiated. If a survivor requests the opportunity to have a facilitated dialogue with the person who has caused them harm, then we facilitate those types of dialogues. We also have an inmate apology bank where we go out to the institutions and do training about what it's like to write a letter where you're taking accountability, not asking the victim for anything, but just expressing your remorse, taking accountability, and communicating what moving forward in a positive way looks like to you. And then we make that letter available to a registered crime survivor should they choose to receive that letter. We also are involved in providing programming inside of institutions. So we have what's called a victim awareness class and an impact of crime class. And in both of those opportunities, there's normally a victim speaker that comes and addresses kind of how this harm has impacted them. It gives the offenders, people present in the class, an opportunity to hear what that looks like from the other side, kind of to provide some space for our connectivity, for people to realize impacts and harms. And then they have those discussions in the course. And that is a course that is evaluated. And it's kind of always unique, kind of, just I don't know, a shocker, but it always seems like a shock to me, the number of people who respond, the number of offenders who write on their evaluation that they never considered how their crime had impacted other people until they heard the victim speak about it. So it just goes to show you how important this type of work is, because then that when people become aware of the connectivity, when they become aware of how their actions matter, it builds so much strength for us as a community. And that's kind of what helps to reduce recidivism, when people realize, oh, I don't want that to happen again, or I don't want to be just that person. When we make space for that in these conversations, it goes a long way towards what we hear from almost every crime survivor, and in different ways at different times throughout the process, is I don't want what happened to me to happen to anyone else. And these types of practices help us to try to move towards that space.
Thank you so much. And then that part about it not happening to somebody else, like there is a fascinating amount of neuroscience that goes on here. And that is about how your brain in these dialogues, like why would a victim ever want to talk? Because you need to take control back for your life. You need to say, I need to make sure that this doesn't happen to me again. If I can figure out why or how won't happen to me or somebody else, control back into that. But it is a pathway to that healing. It's a pathway to that forgiveness. And those pathways need to join up. So the work that you do pulls that opportunity for people to feel healed and to help keep other people safe as well. Keith, what does that look like when you're training people to do this work? And what does that facilitation look like? Because it cannot be easy for anybody. It can be dangerous if you don't do it right. It can re-traumatize people and cause more harm. So how do you do that successfully?
Yeah, so I'll start with just giving you a little bit of what we do at the International Institute for Restorative Practices. So we are the only, not probably the only or one of the few, I'm going to say only right now, that offers a master's degree in restorative practices, accredited by Middle States Higher Education. So we really kind of, at IRP, we have graduate students, we have folks who, we train a lot of people around the world and around the country in these practices. And then we do a lot of community-based work across various settings. So I'll build on that quadrant I talked about, that social discipline window. In order for us to get back to with, is what you're all talking about, whether you're someone who's caused harm or someone who's been harmed, in order to do the with practice, a restorative practice, there is a continuum of practices that are really fundamental. And so it does start with the restorative dialogue. It starts with giving people the opportunity to voice harm and giving those the opportunity who's caused harm to be able to speak to that harm once they've felt some accountability for what they've done is wrong. We are humans, we make mistakes, but the question becomes is how do we actually have a continuum of practices and deal with vulnerability so that we can make things right? And that's really what we're always looking to do. Also along that continuum, starting from proactive to responsive. So think about that. On one end, it's proactive approaches. On the other end, it's responsive approaches. We have the ability to actually deal with shame and humiliation in very impromptu ways. So we can do repair work in very small impromptu ways, whether it's a classroom setting or an incarceration setting. Moving from there to more of the responsive side is we have what's called conferences. And conferences are more people, more time, more resources. It's what you would hear called restorative justice conferences at the far end of the spectrum. So we do have a continuum of practices that we really try to use across the board, and we train on that. So I consider myself, the way I got into this, and then I'll give it back to you, the way I got into this was through training. I've had the fortune of training a lot of different people in both theory and practice. But I also began to understand that it's my responsibility to help you all understand that restorative practices are just more than circles. It's probably most associated with circle practice. And within that circle practice is a whole depth of things that can go wrong. In fact, I've seen people weaponize restorative practices when just used in a punitive way. And so there's a whole level when we begin to circle people up or have engagement or use these practices, there's a level of vulnerability that if we're not very careful, we can cause more harm. And so I say that because there's a depth of scholarship in this work, and it's been written all over the world by many different scholars about what this means, from Fania Davis to all types of folks. And so I like to tend to think I'm a scholar of this work and a practitioner of this work. And so, again, that's kind of how we train on it. I mean, I'll stop there and get a little deeper with that, but there is a level of consistent training about the way it looks in theory and practice.
And I think that's really important because, you're right. I think we have a lot of ways to have dialogue in our societies. People like to talk. We love civil dialogue. We love, heartness. We love democratic deliberation pods. There's all these names for it. But when we walk into this space and when you all do the work that you do, you're coming in with a lot of experience, but also doing that work in an appropriate way, in a staged way that is extremely an expert ensuring that harm doesn't continue or harm doesn't increase. Now, Suzanne, one of the things you said that I think found so fascinating, and I just want to pull that a little bit. It was two really things. I mean, there was a million things, but I'll pull two right now. One was you said that victims' rights are being addressed. And that is fascinating because so often when we think about restorative justice, we think about the perpetrator, the person who's caused harm, and the person that was harmed. You're also looking at the justice system and ensuring that that part about the introduction, that the system itself isn't creating additional harm through the process. So and I don't think we all think about it. We think about somebody that did it, somebody that received it. So how do you address kind of ensuring that the courts, the legal system, the policing system is also being protective and supportive of a victim through that process? What are some of the work pieces that you do there?
Well, fortunately, I do have the opportunity to sit in so many different spaces. And most people do not know that crime victims actually have rights enumerated in the statute. For instance, if I ask you, what are the defendant's rights? Most people know you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say everybody's got that. We got that from the TV shows and everything. But if I ask, what are the crime victims' rights? Most people do not know. So by statute in Pennsylvania, crime victims have rights, and they mostly center around the right to be informed, the right to be notified at different stages of the process, to the right to make a comment at different stages of the process. And so we are constantly letting people know about their right. We provide certain notifications at the time of police response. The police are, by statute, by law, supposed to give crime victims information about their rights and how to connect with other service providers, information about victims' compensation. Those are all rights that are listed for crime victims in the statute. They have a right to make a comment about a plea decision before that decision is offered. They have a right to make a comment before the parole board or before the board of pardons. Now, their right does not dictate what happens in the case, but they do have the right to be heard. So that is very important. And we have been able to kind of center those rights in a really unique way. We had a grant funding to create a video for professional service providers, so to judges, police officers, victim service providers. It's a video on victims' rights and legal standing, because now crime victims actually have the right, if one of their rights is violated, they have the right to go before the judge and say, my right was violated, and the judge can then enter a motion to make sure that they have the opportunity to be heard or make their victim impact statement, whatever right that they missed. So we have a really nice video that was made. We do lots of kind of training to different service professionals, people who are in the justice system field. We do trainings. We provide resources, just like I said, to elevate the voices of crime survivors, because they are not a party to the case. So it is important that they are still heard because of where they sit as a person who has been harmed in a particular case.
And I'm just going to echo that. They are not a party to the case. Like that, you're not labeled as somebody, the person that was most impacted is not a party to the case. That is unbelievable. We set up a justice system that is extremely worried about what the government will do to you. And that's good. Thinking of the colonial period and, all of the issues, the United States Constitution was written really worried that the government would be abuse of power, and that it's saying, no, you can't, no, you can't, no, you can't. And that filters down to the state constitutions and through the 14th Amendment. But thinking on the flip side of that, which is so much of what we talk about at Eastern State, what is the right that you have to have liberty, and then, or in freedom and justice and safety, and then what happens when it's taken away? What power do you have at that point? So I think that is so unbelievably important that we have to elevate it, because your voice won't be there. Now, Keith, when we talk about this whole point of this program is about using this as an alternative to mass incarceration that we have today. So what are some of the statistics? What are some of the outcomes about applying restorative justice practices to really make it a true alternative to the system we have today? Maybe to end the prison pipeline or shrink the prison pipeline, but also to end the high numbers of recidivism we have in this country.
Yeah, I'll start just looking over a few of my notes here. I think we need to start with this, what we know to be true, which is that punitive systems were never designed to produce safety or healing. So if we know that to be true, and we know that human beings make mistakes and do wrongful deeds, a system is not going to fix that alone. So when you talk about the need for alternatives, or I would even say embedded within the spheres of influence within systems itself, it's very, very important that we begin to look at that most people are probably coming back to communities. So people who have served time or are incarcerated are coming back. And what are they coming back to, and how are they coming back? And so that's that reintegration process we talk about. Not only just reintegration of self and with family, but reintegration back into a community that has been harmed or wronged. And if we have nothing in there, then what do we expect? We get what we expect, right? Because I told you, punitive systems are not in the business of safety and repairing harm. So we know, I'll take for example, we know, it's no surprise to you, I don't even have to, we know that the school to prison pipeline is built on high numbers of expulsion and suspensions, the overuse of expulsions and suspensions. From things that probably could have been dealt with if we had pro-engaging, proactive ways of using restorative practices. So we know that 1 or 2 suspensions will get you in the system, and once you're in the system, you're on your way, you're in the pipeline. So the pipeline is real. And so I'll talk about schools, because that's kind of where some of this begins. People who are causing harm are people who've been harmed. People who are violent are people who have experienced violence. So we can't repair or overturn violence with violent practices or practices that just doesn't even make sense, right? And so in schools, one of the efforts that we've tried to do is to look at other disciplinary approaches, right? What does it mean to discipline in a school setting? What does it mean to embed these practices as alternative practices before things get too south, right? What rights do students have, both those who are learners and where their learning is being interrupted, and those who've caused harm and need repair? What rights do they have, and how do we begin to embed and train and teach staff about other alternative ways for addressing conflict? Remember, I told you that continuum of practices where there's a range of things that they should and could be doing to interrupt that. There's no reason why if someone has a fight that they should be cuffed and put in a cell. Fights happen all the time. It's just really sharing and showing that we just have to really help. We have to stop stealing conflict from people and trust that people can address and deal with conflict. And the only way they're going to address and deal with conflict is if we give them the experience and the skills and the practices to do such. And so I'll kind of stop there, because I'll say that for schools and I'll say that for community too. I'll give you a quick example. In Detroit, when I've done work in Detroit, they have the police chief there is a phenomenal restorative practitioner. In fact, what they did was the community decided that they wanted a different approach to police and community complaints, which was a transactional process. Many of these processes are transactional. They're paper trails, they satisfy and check boxes and statistics and things of that sort. They wanted a transferable process. And so what they did was they decided to change the way they did community complaints. And twice a month now, precincts and community members come together, plain clothes, and they actually do restorative conferences and address the concerns. And that right there changed the whole dynamic of the community. So sometimes we have to change the formation and the way we have dialogue in order to change the problem or change the issue at hand. So.
Yeah, that's so powerful. The work that I've done in the past, we did a project at the Constitution Center, Policing in a More Perfect Union, and it brought police and students together in restorative practice conversations about policing that they witnessed in their community. And something that you said earlier, Suzanne, is there's this connection of humanity. And that's what you're trying to get back to. Trying to get people to hear the harm that they cause somebody else makes you connect to their humanity. And it's that red thread of society, that red thread of human beings where we're all connected, but sometimes you can't see it. And to your point, Keith, that when we talk about this, we have a tendency in this society saying it's a binary. You're either the person that caused harm or the person that was harmed. So Suzanne, in your work, we know so many people are those two things at the same time, especially women in our country. We see 70% of women in jails and prisons across our country are people that have caused harm and people that have been deeply harmed. And Keith, people see it because they live it. So Suzanne, how do you balance that work of people that need to be healed and to be able to have that control back, but also might have to turn around and do that back to somebody else, including even members of their community or their family?
I think it's important that when I always try to help people to recognize that there's no one victim voice. That like we say that we're elevating the voices of crime survivors, sometimes that's a wide range of what a survivor wants to be heard. So we have people who they support restorative justice. They want to see offenders. They want to know, like, is the offender doing programming? How are they changing their life? What's happening? They're interested in those types of things. We have other victims who are registered to receive services from us. They don't want to hear nothing about that. They want to make sure that that person is locked up and stays locked up. So across the gamut of that, we try to meet that person where they are, and then be honest about, what does healing look like for you? What would healing mean for you? What does it look like for you to grow beyond that and possibly, feel differently about that? If that's something that may interest you today, or maybe that's something that might interest you 5 years from now. So we try to be intentional about making space for what that looks like. And then it's the same thing on the offender side. Like we try to bridge that gap, that it's not so much this side or this side, but that we're in this together because we are members of the same community. We share the same humanity. We want to be loved. We want to love. We have the same needs. Like in this situation, even though we may be at different points of the pendulum, like how then do we meet the needs of both of those people? Like one of the programs, victim awareness is offered to everyone if that's required, and it's early on when they're in the institution. Impact of crime is something that they request, and they sometimes have to wait to get into that course, and it's usually something that happens later on after they've had some time to kind of sit with it, think about it themselves, about who do I want to be, how do I want to change. So we try to be intentional about providing different things at different spaces in someone's journey, and really supporting the person as to where they are in their journey. We also have a program that's called Resilient Voices, where survivor speakers kind of sign up, they go through a training with us, and then they share and tell their story. Sometimes it's at these classes that I've mentioned inside the institutions. Sometimes it's other community events. And there's something powerful about storytelling for the storyteller and the person who hears the story. Even academically, there's research on it that hearing a story kind of sits different in your brain and allows you to receive information on not just a knowledge level, but on an emotional level. and how that kind of builds bridges that sometimes don't happen in other ways. So that power of storytelling is also something that is used in institutions by survivors, and then also sometimes by the offenders when they are then sharing their stories with us, and what that does to then build understanding and community.
I'm trying not to freak out over here because I love what both of you are saying so much, but the storytelling is so powerful, and it is transformative. It is something that when you're able to tell the story and people are able to hear your story and engage in that, it is a healing power that is so unbelievable, but the research shows that it has future action. So that's what's so fascinating about it. It's not only healing to yourself, it makes your behavior change moving forward. It's one of the strongest tools we have in humankind. It's one of the oldest tools we have in humankind. And yet still not a ton of research on this. The research they have found, it is truly transformative. And that is so much of the work that both of you are doing. And the other side of that you both shared really strongly is time and reflection. One of the reasons that restorative justice isn't across the board is it's not a punitive system. It is a system to heal, but it also takes time and reflection. You said it, you have to give people time to get there on their own, to get to that place on their own, to be able to say, I'm comfortable in hearing this story or sharing this story. But at the same time, to process through that healing and to process through that emotion. When we think about people coming home from incarceration, there's 77% of people who come home get back into incarceration within 5 years. It is an unbelievably failing grade in America. That is not working. What are the types of restorative programs that we should be seeing in our communities for those coming home to not only heal with people they may have caused harm, but the community that they've impacted, the families that they may have impacted, the siblings that they may have impacted? It's hard when your sibling goes to an incarcerated setting. It's damaging for them, it's damaging for you. So what are some of those programs that we should be doing? Some that, if you have a list of what we are doing that are successful, and then what we should be doing more of.
I mean, I'll start. Yeah, I mean, fortunately, we've been doing more prior to folks being released from prison. So there's been a whole lot more programs inside our program. There's stuff happening all across the country. Not enough. More needs to happen. It starts there because that's where the healing starts, right? And so, and I think that is the precursor to reintegration. And reintegration really is a process which starts with how do I find my own dignity within myself? How do I make this right for myself? Most people, most human beings want to do the right thing. I really truly believe that. That's something that John Breathwaite talks about, the criminologist. John Breathwaite always talks about separating, he also talks about separating the deed from the doer. So we as a society have to begin to look at, it's your behaviors that are not acceptable. Remember, go back to that quadrant. It's your behaviors that are failing to meet the expectations and values that we live in this community or in this school or in this family or in this setting. And because it's your behaviors that we really, really want to provide more support to help you change, there's still value in who you are. And that's the dignity part of being human, whether you caused harm or you've been on the other side of that. So when we talk about what could be done or what's happening successfully, it is really about communities being prepared to reintegrate and accept once they've had the ability to repair the harm done for themselves, and it's for that individual that caused that harm to come back into a community in a place where they can make it right. And when people do it well, it's quite powerful. I'll give you an example of a story. There's a fantastic documentary called Inside Out. Unfortunately, there's more documentaries happening on this work, a whole lot more creative stories and documentaries happening. This one's called Inside Out. The main character in this goes through a restorative conferencing, a daily conferencing or weekly conferencing that's happening inside the prison. For many of those folks, it was the first time many of them have even cried or even shared or admitted or held themselves accountable to what they did was wrong. One of the gentlemen that comes out of that and returns back to community ended up being a filmmaker and serves on the board for NACRJ, which is the National Association for Community and Restorative Justice. He's a board member now, but it was because of that journey of healing, and there was a place and a space to have dialogue and tell the story that really allowed him and many, many others, for once they returned, to be able to return back to a community that was willing to embrace them, because the community had an opportunity to heal and accept, and the person who caused that harm had an opportunity to change and heal. And that's truly separating the deed from the doer, that there is still intrinsic value in people, even when they do the most heinous crimes, unfortunately. And so there are people that can do that work, and there are people that can't do that work. But it does come down to dignity at the end of the day.
And this is why I believe this is so unbelievably important to have these conversations here at Eastern State, understanding that this site, this idea for this site in 1787 was a look at human beings that were being put and placed in the Walnut Street jail. And people like Ben Franklin, Benjamin Rush came together and said, we believe that everybody has human dignity. And all we believe is that our society should respect that dignity and find time and reflection for people to get back to their inner light, that all people have that inner good and inner light, and we need to focus on it. Now, at the same time, the counter to that is they come up with one of the cruelest, most torturous ways to imprison people in the world. Mass solitary confinement. 2 years of solitary confinement was the norm. Now that is the juxtaposition with so much of all the work that we do in the justice system. We have a constitutional guarantee or a promise of a just system. And at the same time, some of our biggest ideas and our greatest ideas, without humility, can be unbelievably damaging and wrong. So where in the work that you have done, and I'm turning it over to you all next for questions, so get your questions ready, and online as well, but where in the work that you've done do you see kind of a change in the field to rethink how the field was doing this work 20 years ago? What lessons have we learned even in the last 20 years, not the last 200 years? And by the way, 25 states in the United States have banned long-term solitary confinement, but only 25.
I think a lesson that we have clearly learned, even if we're not all admitting that we learned it, is that while every person has value, you can't find that value by yourself, that everybody needs another person. So kind of what does that mean, and what does that look like to be somebody else's person? Even when you think about adverse childhood experiences and all the studies that have gone into that. And they say, like, no matter how bad the experiences have been or how many ACEs one child has, all they need to change the trajectory of their life is one caring adult. And it does not have to be a family member, but one person that decides they're going to care about that child. So now that we know that that's true, then how do we do that? How do we, and sometimes I think this could be beyond, your 9-to-5 job, but how do you make space to be somebody's person?
Thank you. Keith?
Yeah, as I'm hearing that, I'm also thinking about, I'm thinking about truth and reconciliation right now. We know that in Canada and even in South Africa that there were components of the restorative justice work that were a part of that incredible process. It breaks my heart that we've never had a truth and reconciliation in this country. If there's ever a country that needs truth and reconciliation, it's certainly the United States. But as I'm thinking about truth and reconciliation, I'm also thinking about the individual that has caused harm and the truth and reconciliation. How do they reconcile that in themselves? And if we don't give them a way or a process or a community to do that, how would they ever reach that? It also goes back to when you were talking about oftentimes individuals who've been harmed say, I just don't want them to do that again to anyone else. So how are we going to accomplish that if we don't really embed this into spaces and places where humans are most hurt and most vulnerable. More important than food, water, and oxygen is human connection. It's right there with it. And so speaking of isolation and things like that, it's intentional because it's trying to break the spirit and to continue to punish and using punitive practices as a way to break people, and continue the over-reliance of that. I would also say for those who've been harmed, there is also truth and reconciliation inside of them. There's truth and reconciliation in families. And so we have to create these spaces. And Peter Block, if you know Peter Block's work, I'm a huge fan of Peter Block. He's out of Cincinnati. He's a consultant actually by day, and he's known for his consulting work, but later in his years, he does a lot of community work, and he writes a lot about the structure of belonging in community. And Peter Block says that change happens in the room that you're in, and it happens through conversation. And so I'm a huge fan of that, and I know that to be true. And so, I hope I've given you pieces like separating the deed from the doer, the social discipline window. 80% of your work or our work in this practice is pro-engaging and proactive. 20% should be responsive and reactive. Somehow in many of these systems it's flipped. 80% is reacting and putting out fires, 20% is engaging. It's about being a part of a community and being a responsible member of a community.
Absolutely. And again, so important to have in a place that did everything it could to break community. And this is so much of the work that we do here at Eastern State, is to say, how do we take a place that did create so much pain and trauma and reclaim it to do good, to bring community into center and say we are doing it differently, and what actions can we take as a collective. And thank you both for bringing belonging into this, because belonging is the core of human existence. When we're connected and we're belonging, we then have the ability to think not just individually, but as a whole as well. So questions from the audience. If you have a question from the audience, raise your hand and Campbell will come over. And then we also have questions from the chat. So Carrie is gonna read them out loud. So Campbell, we have a question right up here.
Hi, so my question is, how often do you think someone has one caring adult in their lives?
Not often enough. Because if it was a little more often, we wouldn't have the juvenile justice problems that we currently face. So I think that the need is great, but I think it's doable. I think that it's something that we can actually do. And it could be like all my kids are grown now. So I volunteer at a community organization in my area. And that's all I do. I text her every now and then. I take her out to eat. I say, oh, that's not a good choice. You probably don't want to put that online. Different things like that.
And lesson for all of us.
Sometimes I just send her a text message that says, hey, I'm thinking about you. I care about what happens to you. That's it. So sometimes it's little steps. And then because it doesn't make sense for us to look at children who are hungry, but look at others and feel like they're less than because financially maybe their parents or whoever cannot provide the same for them. And then we want to expect them to do what everybody else does. We want them to perform like everything's good when everything's not good. So, and then I know this is kind of like outside of the realm of the work that I currently do, but when I think about crime prevention, we have to start so much sooner. Like, what will it look like if we give children different coping mechanisms? If we teach them different things while they're in preschool about their feelings and about emotions and about getting along and respecting other people. And that if we teach people that you're valuable because you're a person, like you're worthy of love because you're a human being. If we start telling that to people when they're little, then they won't they'll be less likely to make choices that are harmful to themselves, and then that would possibly one day end up harming others.
Another question. Okay, I've got 3 people there, and then just at some point in time, step by Carrie.
Hi, thank you. I have a question about what does restorative justice look like when the harm is done by the state and a person's rights are violated, they're wrongfully incarcerated, and both for the person who is incarcerated wrongfully, and then must be very unsatisfying for the victim when it's discovered that it was the wrong person incarcerated. So I'm just curious about what that looks like.
It's a great question. I wished I had a really easy answer for you because, again, that's a system that's just refusing to hold itself accountable. I would say that what it could look like, or where I've seen it in terms of the repairing, is at the community level. I think a lot of this happens at the community level. I really do. In fact, I would say that, with the exception of crimes that, violent crimes that are out of one's control, communities can do a pretty good job of managing conflict. In fact, conflict is always an opportunity for change and growth. And so a gentleman up at Detroit talks about don't waste a good conflict, because conflict is the opportunity and reciprocity to heal, repair, and make things right. So I would be lying to you if I told you there's an easy answer to that. I mean, I think maybe on the policy side, we see some movement for schools as systems begin to abandon highly punitive approaches and replace that with cultures of care. You talk about that. So if we really stop looking at the individual and conflict as one-on-one or binary, oftentimes conflict is a product of a broken community, or a culture that has failed, or a culture that is broken. And so if we kind of flip that and say, what if we are all, because everybody's a member of something, if we're a member of the school or a member of this community, how do we make sure that we're setting high expectations and supporting each other so that the culture is healthy? And if the culture is healthy, then we can actually begin to hold each other accountable when there's wrongdoing. So that's why I talk a lot about this 80% of pro-engaging and building community and strengthening relationships, because we're human and we're going to make mistakes. Now, I know I didn't give you the answer that you want, but I think here in the US, we still struggle a bit. I think there are some states that are doing a good job, like Vermont. Some countries that are doing a pretty good job. In Canada, like after the Truth and Reconciliation, they're at least making an attempt to have their 10-point platform be really reconciling. Singapore is really making a strong attempt at really doing more restorative work. Belgium, protect Belgium. So there are pockets, and I would encourage you all to really explore this outside of just school practice. There are many, many countries that have applied this and are doing a fantastic job of Jamaica. I had a chance to train in Jamaica, and the Ministry of Justice is really trying to change completely the way that they deal with crime, all the way to the educational system. So I'm not saying they're there, but at least there is attempt in leadership to make it a different kind of approach.
Yeah. And I think your comment is really powerful too, because we've barely reckoned with our own past in this country. And I think that, it's the work that you're talking about is how do you engage in this conversation, not in like a blame, but into really truly heal. And I think of Reconstruction in America, and we won't reckon with that. But also to the state purpose, like what has the state system caused harm in the past, and how can that be reckoned? There's really fascinating research in some of those countries that you mentioned about how do we engage in the history, and it's nation building. And that's what I found really fascinating with that research. It's talking about when you teach history and civics in classrooms and community centers for all different ages, that you really truly nation build when you reckon with the past and grapple with the hardness of it. And again, that doesn't always mean that people have to take the burden of the blame of the cause, but it does mean that you have to look at it and address it and talk about it, center it in the room. So really great question, really hard to answer, but I think you did a great job.
It is. I'll just add one more thing quickly, but there is promise. It's not all doom and gloom. I mean, I'd say at the individual level, all the way down to school boards and council boards, like in city council, I encourage people to take their activism and run for those seats. Be a part of those seats, because that's really, they shape policy, they shape practice, they shape funding. And there are a lot of really strong grassroots organizations that really have made a difference in making sure that we're tilting a little bit the needle in our favor, like Common Justice in New York, and plenty in Philadelphia as well, where it's through it's activating it. It's really activating it and then chipping away. Will we ever have true system change in America? I'm not sure. I always try to talk about it, and it's not only just as an alternative, but where do we have spheres of influence? And I think the more we engage people who are impacted by policy and practices, the more we will be able to tip the scale on what that policy should look like and can look like.
Great. You want to do an online question? And then we'll go to you.
Awesome. So we've had a couple of questions that are kind of centered around this same theme. So I'm just going to ask one of them because I think it does speak to some of the other questions in the Q&A in the chat. So do you get a lot of pushback from correctional facilities when trying to implement restorative justice? I noticed that a lot of facilities don't want to rehabilitate someone as it's a business industry. So could you speak to that a little bit?
I would have to say no. We do not get pushback. We have a great collaborative relationship with the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. In fact, I even tell them that I don't think people have any idea of the extent that they're going through to try to create good programming and to make sure that people have successful reentry. So we do not see that type of pushback.
Great, and I think we have one more question right here. Black fleece, sorry.
Hi, yes. How relevant or how important are the police departments themselves in this whole process, and what can they do to make it work better? And is there a police department you know of that works to make this work?
Primarily in our work, we don't deal too much directly with the police department because the person, normally by the time the victim is registering with our office, that part is over and the offender has been sentenced to serve time in a state correctional facility. But we do provide training that police officers at the county level and to state police that they often attend. We partner with the state police on some projects. So I think that we're seeing, like you mentioned, a lean toward people trying to understanding more the importance of officers themselves being trauma informed, dealing with vicarious trauma, and being able to deal with people in a trauma informed way. So we see a little bit more of that, and I think that's just kind of happening through some cross training and collaborations. So certainly not at 100%, but I do think that we're seeing a lean towards a lot more understanding.
Yep. Go for it.
You mentioned a couple times about the role education has to play in this. What does that look like in a place like Philadelphia, where public schools especially are pretty chronically underfunded?
Well, I'll tell you that many schools in Philadelphia have been trained in restorative practices, restorative justice. I'll also tell you that training is not going to get us there alone. So training probably is about 10% of knowledge integration. And so we need to be doing more. So I'd say Philadelphia does a pretty good job. I mean, it's there. There's been a commitment to do it. But sometimes it's the misunderstanding of how to have, deep implementation with fidelity. And I think that's the struggle we're faced with. And I'll just quickly, restorative practices, it's our responsibility, collective responsibility, to really have a really deep understanding of what this is. so that it just doesn't become about circle practice. Because then, like a lot of things, what happens is, oh, restorative practice is that, you know, those folks who are in circle and quote unquote do that kumbaya thing, right? Which I'm always offended when people use kumbaya in that kind of way. And so I think it has to work its way into community, and it has to, in the community, I don't see schools, in fact, I de-emphasize that schools is the centerpiece. I think schools is one slice of the pie and a larger part of the ecosystem of communities. And when we begin to see it that way, then the relationships strengthen and the community becomes healthier. And then schools are not feeling like that they make all decisions and that they're the only stakeholders in this game with kids. We've given our control over to schools as take care of my child, and then we hold them accountable when they don't get them back the way we want them. And so I would really highly think about this in a different way as part of an ecosystem, and think about this as social determinants of health and spheres of influence from policy all the way down to the individual. It's a power balance.
That's fantastic. And I know there's a couple educators in the room, so I just want to give like a big round of applause for the work that you're doing every day. And there's, I know 1 and 2, there might be more educators, so thank you, educators. Because there is a lot of pressure on educators today, and there's also a cultural movement right now to other each other, and that's the opposite of this. And so when we think about the choices that we make leaving center here, leaving and going into the community, doing more work, doing more learning, doing more understanding, we think about the choices we can make to lean in, to listen, to open, to engage in dialogue, and to not other people and say and label them for what they did and not who they are. So really powerful conversation tonight. I just want to thank you two so much. This has been so fascinatingly interesting. As I've said before, we need to do this on a monthly basis, because I think every month we could do a different chapter and really dig into it and really expand into workshops where we all come together to have this conversation. But each time you walk through this practice is about learning. It is about being open. It is about strengthening community and in restoring belonging in really difficult situations. And I keep kind of just walking back to that great line by Cornel West, that when justice is done right, justice is love out loud. So when we think about this work, we have to truly put our centering of human dignity in the middle of this work. And even when it's really hard, to be that adult for that kid and to think about the entire ecosystem and not to blame others and just one, and to say, how do we do this together? So thank you two so much for this amazing conversation. Can everybody give those a huge round of applause? Thank you all for being here tonight. It was wonderful for you to come out, and I know it's not a lovely evening out, so I really appreciate it. When I saw the rain this morning, I was a little sad, but we really welcome you here. We also welcome you back in December. We're having 3 Justice 101s in December. They are on programs like the Fifth Amendment, due process and the Fifth Amendment, really looking at where does that stand today? Where did it stand in 1776, 1787, and throughout the years? We're also looking at the Eighth Amendment and excessive punishment. That program will be on site. The Fifth Amendment and due process will be online only. And then on, I want to say December 18th, am I getting that right, Carrie? Okay, the two of us. 18th or 19th, we're doing a programming on community. Eastern State is the first prison in America to have a synagogue. So as soon as they finally officially broke down that centering of isolation, the first thing they did was come together as a community, and our synagogue was the site of that. So it was in 1913, was one of the high holidays was celebrated here at Eastern State. We have a synagogue on site, and we are centering the conversations on how do we bring the light back, and how do we work together through lots of different systems of community, including religious, to have that freedom of religion and to find healing and reconciliation and coming home. So please come back. We have programs every month, online, on site, in lots of different ways, and we encourage you to be a part of our community all the time. So thank you everybody very much. Have a great night.